we'll have to judge and see. But anyways, so Rule 15 is relief from loose impediments or movable obstructions. That includes a ball or a ball marker helping or interfering with play. So our purpose statement for Rule 15, and it covers when and how the player may take free relief from loose impediments and movable obstructions. And these movable, natural, and artificial objects are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course, as these are things that we don't consider a skill, like reading a green or judging wind or things like that. These are just things that are not a part of that challenge, and the player is normally allowed to remove them when they interfere with play. We'll talk about some exceptions when there aren't. When they're near the ball, they might cause the ball to move in the case of loose impediments. And then that's what that last statement says, is that we need to be careful when removing loose impediments, when we're not on the putting green or in the teen area, because there will be a penalty if moving them causes the ball to move. Okay, so a couple definitions to go over before we get into things. So movable obstruction is an obstruction that can be moved without reasonable effort and without damaging the obstruction or the course. Okay, so the most common movable obstruction that you'll see out there on the golf course is a golf cart. It could be the one that you're driving, it could be the one the players are using, but that's the most common movable obstruction that you'll see. We talked about a part of a immovable obstruction or an integral object, such as the gate, which would happen to Annika Sorenstam 2 weeks ago. That part of the gate, or that part of the fence, is treated as a movable obstruction. Okay, and then you might have a movable obstruction that the committee defines to be an immovable obstruction. So that could potentially happen. The most common case scenario that I've seen with that is when you have no lines down for penalty areas and you need those stakes to stay in the same exact location. So the stake to stake line that defines, or the stake to stake area that defines the penalty area, remains the same for all players. So one example that I've run into in my career with this is that we had a tournament at La Costa out in California, obviously not with the GAM, but the PGA Tour, or I think it was PGA Tour at that time, was going to be out there in 2 months. And so part of our contract stipulated that we couldn't put any paint down on the golf course. So we had to keep the stakes, and we had to put them out stake to stake to define the penalty area. But when we did that, we made the actual stakes immovable obstructions so that they did stay consistent from group to group. But typically for our events, you'll see that those stakes will be movable because we have a line of paint on the ground that defines the edge of the penalty area.
Kyle, so normally we assume that red stakes can be moved. So would that be like a local rule for a tournament or something?
Correct. Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. That'd be a local rule if you did that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, and an obstruction is any artificial object except for integral objects and boundary objects. So we talked about those a little bit last time. But some examples of obstructions are artificially surfaced roads and paths, including their borders, so cart paths, buildings or rain shelters, irrigation control boxes. You'll see a lot of those out there. Stakes, walls, railings, and fences, but again, not when they're boundary objects. So if we have a picket fence that goes, or a chain link along the side of the golf course, that is not a obstruction. That's a boundary object, and they're treated differently. We talked about golf carts, mowers, other vehicles, waste containers, signposts, any kind of signage, tents that we might have out there, benches, player equipment, flag sticks, and rakes. Those are all obstructions. And then an obstruction is either a movable or an immovable obstruction if part of the and we talked about this where the part of the immovable obstruction is movable, that part's movable. And then we also see here that there is a local rule available if the committee wants to define certain obstructions as TIOs, or temporary immovable obstructions, and there's special relief procedures for that. So we typically don't do that at our level, but you will see that when you're watching the tour on TV. And typically what the tours do with those is, if they are going to be in play, like grandstands around the green or something like that, they'll typically put in drop zones to handle those. But those are what they define as temporary immovable obstructions, or TIOs. And there's more information about those if you're interested in the model local rule F23. If we ever did those for one of our events, we would definitely go over it with everyone there in full detail, because it is quite, I don't want to say complicated, but it's just different than your normal relief procedure.
Kyle, don't we, can an object be termed integral to the course as well? Like the buildings on 13 at Bloomfield?
Yeah, that's a good a good comment there. Yeah, so we can make buildings, integral part, or objects part, or integral, where players would not get relief from those. And so that could be a building, it could be cart paths. You'll see that sometimes if you have cart paths. I've seen this a lot down south, where if they have like a sand cart path, that's just treated as, general area, and then you don't get relief from those. So that's another example where you might treat those as integral objects. All right, loose impediment is any unattached natural object. So again, a natural object here, not artificial for loose impediment. Stones, loose grass, leaves, branches, twigs, etc. Dead animals. So if you have a dead snake in a bunker, that's a loose impediment. A live snake in a bunker could be a dangerous animal condition, which we'll talk about today as well. Animal crap. So we don't have any geese crap or anything like that in Michigan that we have to deal with, especially in the springtime. But when you do run into that, that is a loose impediment. Worms, insects, and similar animals that can be easily removed in the mounds or webs that they cast. So spider webs are loose impediments. And even though they're attached to another object, they might be attached to a branch or something like that. All right, clumps of compacted soil, including aeration plugs. So you might see those around the green. Sorry, there's someone that has some background noise. If you can mute yourself, that would be great. If not, I'll find you and mute you. Okay, just whatever, I'll just deal with it. Special cases, sand and loose soil. We talked about this before, where sand and loose soil are not loose impediments. However, on the green, you can move those when they're on the green. Dew, frost, and water are not loose impediments. However, snow and natural ice, other than frost, are either loose impediments or, when on the ground, temporary water at the player's option. All right. If anyone knows who that is, let me know, because it's super annoying. Sorry, it's just. All right. Alex, if you can figure out who it is, text me, please.
everyone should be on mute unless you're talking.
Yeah, well, yep, we're gonna try to figure it out. So thanks for everyone's patience. I know technology isn't, it's not easy for everyone, so understand that. All right. The other thing too, anything that's solidly embedded in the ground that cannot be picked out easily is not loose. So again, what I've been a good rule of thumb that I've been told is like if it can pass the flick test. So if you flick it and it moves, then that's movable. But if you flick it and it's not, then that's solidly embedded. However, obviously, if you try to flick a stone or whatever, it might not go anywhere. But that definitely can be a loose impediment. So that's just a general rule of thumb. But again, if it's not solidly embedded in the ground, then that's going to be a loose impediment there. And then anything sticking to the ball. So you'll see that this happens commonly. You might have an insect that is on the ball. That insect is not, really sticking to the ball. So that's something that, you can kind of wave off or whatever, but you can't physically take that thing off because it's not, as long as it's alive, it's not sticking to the ball per se. So sometimes you'll see on the putting green, players will wave their hand or their putter over a ball that might have an insect flying on it or around it. Okay. All right. So without penalty, a player can remove loose impediments anywhere on or off the golf course. So I think we've had this change for a couple of years now, but with the penalty areas, we can now, and bunkers, we can now remove loose impediments. But again, we need to be careful when we're doing that, because if we move our ball in that process and where we are on the golf course, if we're not on the putting green or on the teen area, then we're going to get a penalty in that case. Okay, and we talked about a couple exceptions. One last week where we talked about if we're removing or we're picking up a ball where it's going to be replaced, we can't remove a loose impediment that would have caused the ball to move. Had the ball been there when we were taking that loose impediment out. So you can't take advantage of that situation. If there's a leaf underneath your ball and you picked your ball up to see if it was, cut or something like that, when you put it back, you need to make sure you put it back right on top of that loose impediment. And if we do move the loose impediment in that case, we're going to get a 1-stroke penalty. But in that case, we don't need to put the loose impediment back. So if you do move it when you shouldn't, don't complicate things and put it back. And then there are also some restrictions on deliberately removing loose impediments to affect the ball motion. So we talked about that, and that kind of was one of the things that happened with Camilo Villegas, where he moved. If you guys remember that video from, I think it was 2011, where the ball was rolling down the hill and he moved his divot out of the way so it wouldn't be in his way or wouldn't deflect the ball or anything like that. Okay, but like we said, if it does cause the ball to move, we've got a penalty in that case, but we need to put it back. Okay, and that again, so we have the penalty if it's in the general area or in a penalty area or in a bunker. But if we're on the putting green or if we're in the teen area, there's no penalty for those. Okay, so where we are again really matters. So we always have to keep that in mind when we're thinking about the answers to questions or we're asking players for facts on certain situations. We always need to be cognizant of where we are on the golf course, because the answer could definitely depend on what part of the course we're in. Okay, so loose impediment. So I want to see here. Let's see if we can. So, all right. So you guys tell me if Patrick Reed is moving loose impediments here. Can you guys see the screen? Thumbs up. Nod of the head.
Move the ball. A significant amount. With that much gravity, move the ball. A significant amount. With that much gravity, move.
So what do we think? Is he up to his normal Patrick Reed ways, or is he moving loose impediments down there?
Hard to tell what he's doing. I don't see anything moving.
He looks like he's pulling at the grass, which
Yeah.
would not be a loose impediment.
I think he's checking how much room he's got underneath the ball.
Yeah, looks more like he's improving his line.
Yeah, it looks to like a lie improvement to me.
Nobody listens.
It looks like he's pulling grass out.
Was he attempting to determine if it's plugged?
Yeah, does he have a T in his hand? Is he probing?
I think he's cheating is what he's doing.
Yeah.
But I think this happened last week, but I'm not sure what he was doing. I mean, I think the only thing that you could like rationally say that he would be doing that would allow him to be able to touch or at least get that close to the ball would be if he was moving like a pebble or something like that nearby. Because yeah, if he wasn't moving a loose impediment, I mean, he's obviously like moving the grass, and I don't know from this picture where his line of play is, if he's playing like out towards like the right. So maybe he's like making it easier to get his club behind it. I don't know, but it's kind of one of these things where Patrick Reed just is just a joy to for the rules committee, because he just constantly gives us these things to talk about.
Was he penalized?
Huh?
Did he get penalized?
Yeah, I was gonna say, was there a ruling?
What would
I
we
don't-
do?
I don't-
What
I don't
would we
think
do
so.
without Patrick Reed?
Yeah, I know. I don't think there were any rulings. I know Alex is a big fan of his, so Alex could probably tell us for sure if there was a penalty or not. But I don't believe that he got penalized or anything. It's just kind of one of these things where people are just shaking their head like, what is this guy doing? Not again. But
Yeah, they don't penalize American heroes like Patrick Reed, so he did not receive a penalty.
all right, fair enough. All right, movable obstructions. So we talked about that. This is really, we're talking about artificial objects that meet the definition. So again, it could be a cart, a bench, a trash bag, a lawn chair, something along those lines. And we're not talking about cart paths here or any other immovable obstructions. We'll talk about that under 16. So we do get a free relief from these. So without penalty, a player may remove the movable obstruction anywhere on or off the golf course and may do so in any way. There are a couple exceptions though. We talked about these. We can't remove tee markers when we're in our teen area. Okay, so if we top it and we're 20 yards ahead and there are other tee markers, we can move those, but not the ones in our teen area. So of the hole that we're playing. And then we can't deliberately move a movable obstruction to affect a ball in motion. So that's that Corey Pavin scenario where the ball was rolling towards the rake and his caddy moved the rake. That's another exception where we can't move a movable obstruction. So when we're doing this, if the ball moves, in this case, there's not going to be any penalty, and we're just going to place it on its original spot. If we don't know the exact spot, then we're going to estimate that spot and place it there. So a common example that you might run into, and this picture's in the rule book as well, is you might have a ball that's resting up against a bunker rake. In this case, we can just move the rake, and then if the ball moves, we would just place the ball back where it was. So typically, it's a good recommendation to have the player put a T where that ball is, especially if they think the ball is going to move, but they're not required to do that. But you might want to do that, especially in a case where the ball's going to move, or you might have it like at the edge of a bunker or something like that, where you know the ball's going to move. Putting a T in the ground there would be helpful, so that you can identify that spot and get the ball back. And then if we have a situation where the ball is on top of a movable obstruction, again, we're going to, we can pick up the ball in this case, and then we can move the towel, and then we're going to, in this case, we're going to be dropping the ball. If it doesn't have a particular spot in the golf course, we're going to be dropping the ball. But our reference point for that is going to be the estimated spot right below where the ball is. And then we get our normal 1 club length relief area, which you can see here on the right. Okay, so that could be this towel. It could be if the ball was sitting, outside in the general area on top of a rake. That would be another case where we'd have a drop. If it was in your cart, in the back of the cart, we'd take that spot directly below where the ball was. That would be your reference point. Oops. And then you get 1 club length in which to drop from that spot. Okay, but what if we happen, if we remember, if we have this situation here where let's just say that the ball is sitting on top of the rake, but it's inside the bunker, what's the ruling there? How do we deal with that?
Kyle, I have a question that maybe relates to that. What happens if you're in the bunker, you place the ball, you're on a steep slope, you try to place the ball, it will not stay. You go through that motion. Do you take 2 tries and then nearest point where it will stay?
Yeah, so in that case, you're gonna try, and then you're gonna try again, and then if it doesn't stay, then you're just gonna keep moving to the nearest most similar lie, in that case, where the ball will stop. But if it's in the bunker, it needs to stay in the bunker in order to avoid a penalty. But you might have to go outside the bunker if you can't find a spot in the bunker that's nearer, or that's not near the hole, and in that case you would have a penalty. But you're going to just keep moving until you find the spot within the bunker that it will stay. And that's why typically we ask that the rakes be placed outside the bunkers, because if they're inside on the edges, especially near the back part of the bunkers, the golfer may not, in your scenario, find a spot where it's not near the hole where they can get the ball to stay at rest. And their only option at that point is to come outside the bunker for a penalty stroke.
So Kyle, to answer your question, if a ball's sitting on top of the rake in the bunker, it's considered in the bunker.
Okay. So then how do we get the ball back in play? Do we drop it? Do we place it? Because we get relief from it, right?
Right, you get relief from it. So I would say you would drop it. Because it's sitting on top of the obstruction, not against it.
And you have to drop it, but he's got to keep it in the bunker. He's not allowed to take it outside the bunker.
Any other thoughts? Anyone want I asked a question. I mean, sometimes when I ask questions, I don't 100% know the answers. I'm just hoping that someone on the other line knows it. But
I guess I would agree with Dan. If it's sitting on top of the obstruction,
mhm.
then by definition of how replacing the ball, I would say you drop it. It's not in the putting green. Any other times when it's sitting on top of an obstruction, you drop it to replace it.
Right. Yeah, because when we look at it, just says that. Yeah, the only, like you said, Craig, the only difference is when it's on a putting green. That's the only.
Right.
That's the only time where it's different.
That's when you would place it.
Right.
But
So,
it's
yeah,
on-
I've seen that on the, not with a rake, but I've seen it with actually with a banana peel in a bunker.
15.2B2 explains that.
Okay.
It's a drop. Reference point nearest club.
Perfect. Yep. So then,
Al, may I ask a question?
sure.
Previously, you said something about a ball on top of a leaf, and we went on about leaf is the movable option. But in that case, you said that the leaf, the ball had to be played as it lied, which is one of the mainstays of golf. But in this case, it seems like it's working against you. Can't you pick the ball up, remove it, and using that location as reference point, do a drop?
So in this case here, the example we're talking about is this movable obstruction or this artificial object as opposed to a leaf. So if it's a leaf and the leaf's underneath it, we would have to play that. We could try to move the leaf, but if the ball moved, there'd be a penalty. So chances are, if you move that leaf underneath the ball's probably going to move in that case.
Okay.
Good question. And then I think Phil, to your point earlier, yeah. So when you're dropping that ball, that player would need to stay in that same area. So they would have to stay in the bunker when they're dropping that ball in their relief area.
Kyle, John Allen, I have a question too.
Mhm.
And it concerns the scenario that's depicted in the diagram that's on the screen. Not the ball on the rake, but the ball on the sand up against. And when you move the rake, the ball moves. If the ball has not first been marked, is it to be replaced or dropped? I don't know how you know the original spot unless the ball has first been marked.
Sure. Yeah. So you're going to place it in that case, provided that again it was touching the sand and had a place on the golf course. You're going to place it, and if you don't know the exact spot, you're now going to estimate that, but you'll still place it. And that was one of the changes in 2019, because previously, if you didn't know the exact spot, you would drop. But now we're saying that if you don't know the exact spot, you're just going to estimate to your best ability and then place it on that spot.
Good. That answers my question. Thank you.
Yep. All right. So then again, anywhere except on a putting green. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Somebody said something about a banana peel. What was that? Doug, I think was.
Yeah. So a banana peel would be a little bit different because that would be a loose impediment, right? And not necessarily a movable obstruction. So I believe in that case, the player would probably need to either move it and hope the ball doesn't move, or take an unplayable or play it.
Yeah,
Is that what happened?
Right. So if the ball is either next to or on a banana peel, you don't get free relief if the ball moves, or you get free relief, but if the ball moves, you're going to get penalized.
Correct. I think Doug is nodding his head, so I think that's what happened there.
Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so again, when it's not on the putting green, we're gonna find that point, and then we get that 1 club length relief area in which to drop on. And as Phil pointed out, it's got to be in the same area of the course. Okay, so if we're in the bunker, we have to stay in the bunker in that case. Thanks, Dan and Craig, for the help on that question. So if it's on the putting green, however, though, we're going to place the ball right underneath. And again, if we don't know the exact spot, which hopefully we should be able to figure out the exact spot, but we're going to place in that case if it's on the putting green. All right, what happens if the ball is not found, but is in or on the movable obstruction? I say if we have known or virtual certainty that the ball came to rest in or on a movable obstruction, the player can use this relief option instead of taking stroke and distance. Okay, and then we use the estimated point right under where the ball last crossed the edge of the movable obstruction as the reference point. And then we get the one club length area from that point. So this probably won't happen a ton, but let's say, I mean, there's 2 examples that I think about that could definitely come up. One, you might have like a trash barrel, a big trash barrel that's full of nasty crap, and someone sees the ball go in there, or we know the ball goes in there. And, you know, we don't necessarily need to go and put our hands through all that crap and find the ball. But if it's known or virtually certain that it's in there, then that player would be able to take free relief from that. And we would use that point. If we don't know the exact spot, we use the point where it last crossed the edge of that immovable obstruction or the rim of the trash bin. And then from that point, they get their 1 club length out in which to drop. No nearer the hole. And then another example where you might run into as well is that, you know, you might know for certain that a golfer hit the ball towards you and it's in your cart somewhere, but you don't know where it is. Maybe it's underneath the seat, it's in the back somewhere, it's in one of the compartments, but you know for certain that it's in there, but you can't find it. That's another example where you'd have that known or virtual certainty, and you would just find out the point where the ball last crossed the whatever sphere of the cart, and you get your one club length from there.
Would that be true of some courses after a storm or some pile up branches off to the side of the general area and off the fairway, I should say, and is that considered a movable obstruction? Because they're going to move it out in a couple of days. I'm not quite sure. Or a pile of grass next to a green.
Right. Yeah. So it's a good question. That wouldn't be classified as a movable obstruction, but it could be classified as an abnormal course condition. So ground under repair. But again, so in that case, you'd have the same ruling in terms of if you have knowledge or virtual certainty, you could take relief. But the key there with those piles or those things that are piled is that, you know, there needs to be, in order for us to define them as abnormal course conditions, they need to be removed or plan to be removed later. If they just dump those things just to dump them there and they have no plans to move them, then they're not abnormal course conditions at that point. And again, when we're talking about this knowledge of virtual certainty, if we don't have knowledge of virtual certainty, you know, obviously we need to go back and play under stroke and distance. So again, we need to have knowledge of virtual certainty in this case. But in a lot of cases, you know, you'll see a spectator will say, I know for certain it's in that trash barrel. You know, you might see it yourself. So there's lots of ways to get that virtual certainty, but if there's any chance that it could be elsewhere and we don't have virtual certainty, we're not 95% certain, then we're going to play under stroke and distance in those cases.
Kyle, that example was just mentioned of the piles of trees off the fairway. I ran into that the other day. Lots of tree limbs piled up, trimming, getting ready for the season.
Mhm.
Would you get complete relief, including line of play?
So we're assuming that they're planning to remove them. In that case, it's just like you would get relief from like a ground under repair or temporary water. So you don't get line of play relief from those. Just stand, swing, and lie a ball.
Okay, so you have to hit over it, basically, you're saying.
Yeah, well, if it's not in your swing or your stance, or the ball wouldn't be impacted by those, then yeah, you'd have to hit over it.
Yeah, it's just a rub of the course in that case. You're just out
Right.
of luck.
Yeah.
Bad luck.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're playing in Michigan in March, it's good luck, I'd say. But I'm just kidding. But yeah, by the rules, you would hit over that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, what happens if the ball or ball marker is helping or interfering with play? So we kind of touched about this a little bit last week when we talked about backstopping, but this is kind of a scenario here. But that's kind of when it's helping. We also have, interfering as well. So when the ball's on the putting green, this is kind of the backstopping. It only applies to a ball at rest, not anywhere else in the course. So if the player reasonably believes that a ball on the putting green might help anyone's play, then the player may mark the spot of the ball and lift it under Rule 13.1b if it is his or her own ball, or if it belongs to another player, require that the other player mark the spot and lift the ball. Okay, so again, it's any player. So even if I'm a third party to that ball or whatever, if I'm just playing with a group, I can still request that. And again, I think I'll show you the interpretation here in a sec, or the clarification that the USGA and RNA came up with, but it kind of goes along those same lines, is that it's really on the players to police. Okay, and then a player who is required to lift the ball can play first. So you might have that too, where you have, again, we're still on the putting green, so maybe instead of marking it really quickly, they just go up and they putt. Again, this is stroke play, because in match play, obviously, I would be playing on a turn. But if we do have an agreement to leave a ball in place to help any player, such as to serve as a backstop, then the player makes a stroke with the ball left in place. Each player who made the agreement gets the general penalty, 2 strokes in this case. Okay, so let me see here.
Question.
Yeah.
Kyle, just using that as an example. I'm in the trap. You've hit the ball on the green. It's in a spot behind the pin. And you say, you want me to mark that? And I say, no, just leave it, please.
So that would be an issue. I'm not 100% certain on whether there is an agreement in that case, because it's really one player acting that out. But I would say in that case, we would probably, if the player, or at least, I don't know, I guess I would interpret that as that if the player who said, okay, I'll leave it there, doesn't like object to it, then I don't know. It's a gray area. I don't know if there's. Let's just read this comment on backstopping, and then maybe we can come up with a better answer for that. Or so here's what the USGA has said about backstopping. So a player without an agreement or any other player leaves his or her ball in place in the putting green close to the hole in a position where another player who is about to play from off the putting green could benefit if his or her ball struck at rest. As there's been no agreement to leave the ball in place to help any player, there is no breach of the rules. So I guess in this case, we would say that there'd be, you know, I don't know if in that case, Doug, if we would have an agreement per se. But what they do say is that the RNA and USGA, nice that the USGA puts the RNA first out front there so they can take the blunt of or the brunt of all these things. But takes the view that backstopping fails to take into account all the other players in the competition and has the potential to give the player with the backstop an advantage over those other players. So consequently, the RNA and USGA offers players the following guidance and explanation of best practice. In stroke play, the competition involves all players, and because each player in the competition cannot be present to protect his or her own interest, protecting the field is an important responsibility that all players in the competition share. And therefore, in stroke play, if there's a reasonable possibility that a player's ball close to the hole could help any other player who is about to play from off the green, both players should ensure that the player whose ball is close to the hole marks and lifts that ball before the other player plays. So then if all players follow this, then it ensures that the protection of everyone in the field is done. So I'm not sure, Doug, if that I think there's still a gray area on what happens there, but my interpretation would be, or I guess my follow-up question would be to the player that hit that bunker shot, was that, were you okay with that? I wouldn't say did you agree to that per se, or did you agree to that? Just say what happened? Can you talk to me more about the situation, and then just say, were you okay with what happened there? I think that's probably the best way to handle it in that scenario. I don't know, others might have some thoughts to share on that.
Kyle, I had a discussion with the USGA regarding that situation. If the player acquiesces and does nothing, just leaves it there, he's guilty, the same as the other player.
Okay.
That's penalty.
I think that clears it up there then.
Yeah, it seems to me, Kyle, that would be the that would be the ruling too, because in reality, let's face it, that's what they're agreeing to, even if
Right.
even if the player just says, no, leave it there, please, or he doesn't want it to be marked. I mean, really, they're agreeing. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I think there is, there could be some nuance for sure, especially if the player in the bunker might not know, where their ball ended up, or how, if it really is. I mean, if it's a blind shot and they are up there and they don't really know for sure if the ball would be interfering, then you might have a little bit of leeway there. But if they could see it and it's clear as day that would be helping the player, then yeah, I think that's what Marv said is 100% right. And typically that's the scenario you're going to run into. Yeah, and so that, Dennis asked a good question. I think that's if nothing is said, then you don't really know. So it's kind of like one of these things that maybe it's just better off to just be quiet and know it's just this unwritten rule that the players have amongst themselves. But that gets on a slippery slope when we're talking about this. So I think it's really just one of these things that, if the players are smart, they know how to answer this question and they know what to do to not get penalized. And there probably are players out there that do that. I won't name anyone by name. All right. What happens if the ball is anywhere on the course and interferes with play? So, interference is a little bit different than helping. So if the ball might interfere with the player's area of their stance or their swing, or is on or close to the player's line of play, or it's close enough to distract the player, then we can ask for that ball to be marked or moved, or in some cases that player could play first. There are lots of different ways to kind of handle that. So typically you'll see this obviously like on the putting green, but you might also run into it if you have two players or there's two balls that are close together, maybe two balls in the fringe or two balls in the bunker. In that case, you can have a player mark and then the other player play, or if one player can play without interfering the other player, and it's stroke play, that's typically the recommended way to do it. And even match play, that could be a scenario where you could agree to play out of turn, and be okay in that scenario. But when we do this, and we talked about this last week, we just need to be careful if we're not cleaning the ball in that case. So typically when you see a player do this, they will mark the ball and then they'll lift it and then they'll put it off to the side so that they know they're not cleaning it, or they'll continue to hold it with two fingers like this so they know they're not cleaning it in that case.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
As far as cleaning that ball, if you pick that ball up and that ball is clean already and nothing on it, you don't have a problem.
Right.
It's if there's grass or dirt or mud or something on there, then you're gonna need to be careful. But I've heard of people calling rules violations because the person didn't hold the ball correctly, which there's nothing in the rules that says how to hold that ball. But if that ball is completely clean, and we had this just last week in our USGA PGA rules class, you're still okay. If you put it totally in your hand, that ball was completely clean. There was nothing to clean anyway, so you're still fine.
Right. Yep. Yeah, but not. Go ahead.
Well, one issue that can arise, however, is if the ball is not cleaned, it should be replaced, aligned in the same way it was when it was picked up. That's why I think careful players not only hold it with two fingers, but they take one of those fingers, like their index finger, and point it towards the flagstick with the thumb opposite that, and then put it down exactly the same way. So
that is not correct.
Right. Yeah. There's a interpretation that talks about that the player can place it back in any direction, except they can't place it where the ball may be like teed up on a clump of mud or something like that. So if the mud was facing to the left, you could turn it to face the right or to face away. That's there. I forget the exact interpretation on that, but it is in there.
All right. So if there's a clump of mud on the back of the ball and the player is asked to lift it for interference, he may replace that ball and turn the mud so that it doesn't impact the club face. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's the way the rule is.
Kyle, it's 14.2C/1.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kyle, it needs to maintain its vertical distance from wherever it was before.
Yep.
Right.
Can't have an elevation change.
Right. Yeah. So
the rule makes no sense, but so be it.
Kyle, I have another question. This is one I think I screwed up one time. Under 15.3B, that third point, it says close enough to distract the player. It's the player who is feeling distracted for whatever the reason is. He has the right then to say, please mark the ball. It's distracting my whatever, concentration, I guess.
Right. Yeah, but it's that player, and that there's the second to last point here that says that a player is not allowed to lift his or her ball based on this player's own belief that it might interfere with another player's play. But if I, the player, can ask that another ball be lifted if it's going to interfere or gonna distract me, but I can't say, well, my ball might distract Doug, so I'm going to lift it here. Doug needs to tell me that it actually distracts him before I lift it in that case.
Yeah, I screwed up on that one time. I thought it had to be, it was line of the line of the stroke or something like that. And so clearly that it is the choice of the person who believes they'll be distracted.
Correct, yes. And the only exception to that obviously is if the ball's on the putting green. If the ball's on a putting green, then we can lift the ball without, if there's interference or not, we can always mark and lift that. Okay, so I think that
How is it, there's no definition of what close enough means?
I was just gonna ask that question.
I don't know. It's probably, I'm not sure why they don't have an exact definition for it, but my guess is that they're probably want it to be a little bit, open in terms of what that means. So
is that likely to be an issue that a referee during a match would define, or is it just simple that if the player says it distracts me, then it's a done deal no matter where it is?
I mean, I think if you feel like there might be some malintent behind this, then I think you could step in as the referee. But if there's nothing that you would say that would lead to that, then I think you just go with what the players say in that case.
Well, now I'm gonna have to understand what definition of malintent is. I mean, if a player's ball is 3 yards away and he said that ball distracts me, how would I possibly determine malintent or I mean, I'd say sorry.
Yeah.
If I were the referee, but now I'd have to say, okay, you're right, pick it up.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think some of it too is maybe the caliber of the golfers. If you had like someone like me, if it was like 3 yards away, then yeah, it could be in the way. Or if it was like off a little bit to the left in my shank zone, then yeah, it could be in my way. But I think in most cases you're just gonna go with what the player says, unless you feel like the player is doing it to piss off the other player. And there might have been something that happened in the last hole that didn't go well, and they're just going to do this to, infuriate the player or try to get under the player's skin. But I mean, that would probably only happen in match play and probably only happen with like high level players.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Kyle, would there be any difference given that it was a partner's ball, giving them the opportunity to, use a line for aligning a putt off the fringe kind of thing?
Well, I don't think so in that case, because if it's partners, the person that's farthest away can play first or has a right to play first. So I don't think that matters. Maybe I'm not answering the question right, but I don't believe it matters in partner play.
Well, I mean, kind of to, if your partner wanted to, if a player wanted to allow his partner the opportunity to use the line on the ball to line up a putt from the fringe.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
So he kind of liberally says, could you mark that, even though,
Yeah, that would be a good example where you'd have to question the reasoning behind it. And if they did that solely for that, then I think you would. I mean, I can't say for certain that it'd be a penalty, but I would imagine that. If that was their sole reason for doing it and there wasn't real interference, then I think you could probably justify in penalizing there.
I guess my question, Kyle, would be, what if the competitor didn't want to lift his ball? Say it was 3 or 4 yards away and he didn't want to lift his ball because he liked the position of his ball.
Right, yeah, so I believe that there's, so if the person doesn't move it out of the way, then we're gonna have a penalty for that player here. So hold on, let me just make sure on that, but I believe that, okay, so either, so the ball marker, this case just talks about ball marker, but
It was kind of on the bottom of that last page.
this one here. Okay, yeah, so if the player makes a stroke without waiting or helping, then they would get a penalty. And then also if they refuse to lift his or her ball or move the ball marker out of the way, then they're going to get a penalty there.
Right. But in stroke play, could they play first instead if they didn't want to? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, and typically what you'll see in these scenarios is that typically that's what happens is that the player who doesn't have interference will play first, just so that they don't have to mark it and worry about it. But it doesn't always happen the way. But that's usually, if you're there on site, like that's the first option that you want to give a player if they ask you about that is, well, can the other player play first so we don't have to do all this marking and moving. And I think, Chris, you asked a question in the chat. I think that this answers your question as well. So I think if you're talking about player, I'm just going to read it here. If player A asks if player B wants him or her to mark his or her ball, and player B replies no, just leave it, and player B hits his or her shot, do both players receive a penalty, 2-stroke penalty? So in this case here, if player B, this is kind of a backstop thing, but if player A doesn't go up and mark it or tell player B to wait, let me go mark it before you hit, then player A would get a penalty in that case as well. But if player A says, hey, to player B, wait, let me go mark this, and player B plays ahead without giving them the opportunity, then just player B would get the penalty in that case. And that's this thing here where they make a stroke without waiting for the ball to be lifted. Okay, so basically what this page here is saying is that we have the same thing with the ball. Same thing applies to the ball marker. If the ball marker is in a way, we can move that, and we all see this happen on the putting green. We've all done this before, and this, the same thing can apply anywhere out on the course. So you might have a ball in the fringe, and the player marks it with, a tee or a coin, but then the player wants that tee or coin in the fringe to be moved out of the way. They can do that too, just like they do on the putting green, and then put the ball or the ball marker back there, and then replace the ball. All right, any questions on 15 before we move to 16?
Hey, Kyle, I just have a comment. We had a situation in the women's floorball, I think in 2019, that Rule 23.5 specifically prohibits partners from agreeing to leave a ball in place. That would help either one of them or any other player.
Yep.
So it's just, the question came up, what if it's your partner? It is covered in Rule 23.
Okay. 23.5, you said? Yep.
Yeah, I think it's in B, 23. I think it's 23.5B.
Yep. Yep. I didn't know Patrick Reed played in the GAM women's floorball. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'll move on to 16. All right, 16. So 16, we're talking about relief from abnormal course conditions, which includes immovable obstructions, dangerous animal conditions, and embedded balls. So Rule 16 covers when and how the player may take free relief from playing a ball from a different place when there is interference by an abnormal course condition or dangerous animal conditions. Again, these are not treated as part of the challenge of playing the course, and free relief is generally allowed, except when we're in a penalty area. And there are some situations where we will not give player relief if it's unreasonable for them to be playing from that area to begin with. So then the player normally takes relief by dropping the ball based on the nearest point of complete relief. And then we also cover free relief when a player's ball is embedded in its own pitch mark in the general area in Rule 16. Okay, so abnormal course conditions. So we have these things. We have basically 4 things that are covered under abnormal course conditions. We have an animal hole, ground under repair, immovable obstruction, and temporary water. So whenever we're talking about any of these things, these are what we call abnormal course conditions. But each one has its own definition, and we'll go over those here. Again, we're not getting relief from those movable obstructions that we talked about in 15, or boundary objects or integral objects where there's no free relief. So that chain link fence that runs on the boundary of the golf course, there's no free relief from that. Or if there's an integral object, so maybe some stacks of stones, you might see those at like polo fields or Oakhurst, where we wouldn't give free relief from those areas potentially. All right, so an animal hole is any hole dug in the ground by an animal, except for holes dug by animals that are also defined as loose impediments. Okay, and then the animal includes the loose material of the animal dug out of the hole, any worn down track or trail leading into the hole, and any area of the ground pushed up or altered as a result of the animal digging the hole underground. So you'll see those, like, now we don't need to figure out if the animal's burrowing or not with these 2019 rules, which is great, but you'll see that you might have some skunks that dig tunnels or gophers or whatever, and those kind of tracks and trails would also be defined as an animal hole as well. All right, so ground under repair is a big one here. And typically we'll be dealing with ground under repair at every event that we run, because there's so many different things that can fall under ground under repair. So the area itself is includes all the ground inside the edge of the defined area, which could be defined by a white line. It could be defined by stakes that maintenance team puts out. There are different ways that we define it, that will notify the players of in the local rule sheet, and their starters will tell the players as well. It also includes any grass, bush, tree, or other growing or attached natural object rooted in this defined area of ground under repair, and including any part of those objects that extend above the ground outside the edge of the defined area. However, but not when such object is attached to or below the ground outside the edge of the defined area, such as a tree root that is part of a tree rooted inside the edge. So you might have a white circle of ground under repair. Let's make that red, and you have your tree here. I know my drawing is really good, so. And you have your branch here. So this branch, because it's overhanging, is part of the ground under repair, but the roots here or the stump is not, because that's outside. Okay, ground under repair includes the following things, even if the committee doesn't define them. So any hole made by the, yep.
Now, excuse me, in your example, what about the opposite? If the tree is inside the ground under repair lines and the branches are outside and the roots are outside?
So, okay, so the roots are outside. The tree itself is in the ground under.
Correct.
But then the roots, the roots, when they extend outside of it, are those part of it? Is that the question?
Correct, correct.
Hmm. So I don't believe that it is. I believe that's what this is saying here, is that if the roots outside the edge would not be in that case. Is that your understanding as well?
That would be my understanding, but the tree branch would be.
Yeah, so if we have,
Very good.
so you're saying that in this case here, these roots are not ground under, but this tree branch is, correct?
Correct.
Yep. That's how I understand it.
Okay. Thank you.
So Kyle, the nearest point of complete relief outside of that ground under, if you have interference from that branch, then you get relief from that branch, correct?
Correct, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so any hole that's made by the committee or maintenance staff would be defined as ground and repair, even if we don't define it. A couple examples of that: setting up the course, such as a hole where a stake has been removed, or the ground on a double green being used for the play of another hole, or maintaining the course, such as a hole made in removing turf or tree stump, or by laying pipelines, but does not include aeration holes. So if you see that, and even if it's not marked, it's still by definition ground under repair. We talked about this a little bit ago. The grass cuttings, leaves, or any other material piled for later removal. And any natural materials that are piled for removal are also loose impediments. But they do define as ground repair. The key is that we are going to later remove them, or that they're intended to be removed later.
Kyle.
Yep.
I'm remembering an incident, the Masters, Ernie Els on 11, huge duck hook, something like I would hit, except it wouldn't be huge in distance, but big way left, way out of play. And whoever had that hole had looked around ahead of time and studied it. And there was a bunch of trees jammed together, cuttings and everything way out of play. And he had checked with the superintendent. They weren't intending to ever remove that. And Els didn't like it. And he asked for somebody else to come. And one of the Masters people that was part of it gave him relief. I can't remember if he was looking for relief simply because he couldn't hit it up over it, which wouldn't be a normal thing, but I know it. What I remembered from it is it's important when you've got a particular hole to look entirely at that hole before play gets there as best you can, so that you would know, has this been piled for removal, or is it, they're never going to move this, it's so far out of the way, because that's what came up there with Els.
Decision was made by John Roberts, and John Roberts said it was piled for removal. And that's why he got the relief, because Mark Wilson was working that hole at that time. However, the next year, that pile was still there.
Yeah, that's what I wondered, Mark, because I thought I thought it was John, but I wasn't positive because it came up in a conversation. Because at the time, it just like, man, he's left of the world.
Yeah, I got a big break there.
Thank you,
Well,
Mark.
more importantly, it's Augusta National. There's nothing piled for removal at Augusta
Yeah.
National. I mean, you drop a napkin and it's gone before you turn around.
Yep. No, thanks for bringing that up, Steve. It's a good point too, when you're out there as a trouble hole official or a referee to make sure that you're surveying that entire hole, so you know any areas that might be problem areas, or you can get those questions asked ahead of time. Because one of the things that we talk about when we're talking about ground and repair, we want to apply it consistently from group to group when we're in stroke play, which is the majority of time. So we need to make sure that we're giving every player 1 to 100 the same ruling when it comes to that. And the rule does say later. So later is open to interpretation. So later could mean a month from now. It could be 3 years from now. So we'll have to find out if that stuff on 11 is still there or not. All right. Any animal habitat, such as a bird's nest, that is so near a player's ball that the player's stroke or stance might damage it, would also be defined as ground and repair. Again, except when it comes to worms and insects, though that habitat is just still a loose impediment. So again, we're going to typically define these. There's multiple ways to do it, but for GAM events, we're typically going to define those by white lined areas, or they're going to be roped off by stakes that the maintenance crew puts out there. Okay, you can also use physical features, so like a flower bed, and we would just make sure we are, we know exactly how that's defined. But we typically, when we're running our events, we'll typically define those flower beds as no play zone and ground under repair areas. And then if we do use lines, this goes for both penalty areas as well, but when we do use lines or physical features to define the ground under repair, any stakes that use to show where it is are just that, to just show where it is. So it doesn't define the actual area. So if we define the area of ground under repair as a no play zone and put a blue stake in it, which we do typically, that blue stake just only really defines it. It really means nothing else and can be moved and anything like that. Okay, and then the other thing too, just that I want to talk about with ground under repair is when we're talking about this and we're considering giving relief, the biggest thing is that we revert back to what we're talking about. We're talking about an abnormal course condition. So the key word is abnormal there. So something that's ground under repair or abnormal at Augusta might be different than what's abnormal at Leslie Park or a golf course here in Michigan. So it's all relative to where we're at. And if it's not abnormal to where we're at, and that could also be the time of year as well, where early on in the season, you're going to have a lot more areas of bad growth. And if that's not abnormal to the course, then we're not going to define those areas as ground under repair because it's not abnormal. It's always good to keep that in the back of your head. Yeah.
Question, Kyle. In the springtime especially, players will ask for relief on rutted ground, typically caused by the grounds committee or the staff.
Mm-hmm.
Could you comment on that?
Yeah, so you're like tire ruts or things like that.
Correct.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not guaranteed for relief, but typically, you would probably want to err on the side of giving players relief from those situations. But really, when it comes to with these ground under repair discussions, and I know we talked about this at the very beginning when we started talking about refereeing, but in that case, you really want to, if it's not clear and 100% certain, you really want to get your rover involved, because again, we want these to be consistent from hole to hole. So in that case, if you're not 100% certain on ground and repair, get your rover involved, and our rover can make sure, he or she can make sure to give the proper ruling and that it's consistent across all 18 holes. But I would say typically a tire rut, if it's deep, is definitely going to qualify as ground under repair. All right, moving on to immovable obstructions. So again, it's an obstruction that can't be removed without unreasonable effort or without damaging the obstruction or the course. And the committee can define an obstruction to be an immovable obstruction even if it meets the definition of immovable obstruction. So we talked about that with the example of a stake, red stake, for example, if we're not using lines. Temporary water. So that's a temporary accumulation of water on the surface. That's not in a penalty area and can be seen before or after the player takes a stance without pressing down excessively with his or her feet. So I think that's really important to understand that it needs to be either seen before or after the player takes a stance. And they can't just stomp to get the water to come up. But if they take their stance normally and the water comes up and we can see it, then that meets the definition of temporary water.
Kyle.
Yep.
We might want to go back. We might want to go back to that question you just had about ruts, because in the big book, page 337, ground under repair /2, damage caused by committee or maintenance staff is not always ground under repair.
Right. Yeah, that's I don't know. I didn't
specifically.
I said typically, but it's not always. So I mean, I guess I think that's what they're saying. Go ahead.
Well, this says examples of damage that is not ground under repair by default includes a rut made by a tractor. So probably something, as you said, needs to be discussed with the rover or by the official in charge for sure.
Right. Right.
It may be redundant there.
Yeah, no, that's good to bring up, because it's not it's not by definition like some of the other things that were on there. It's not by definition ground for repair, and it's up to the committee to decide that.
In the next paragraph down, it talks about the ball in the tree rooted in ground under repair. If it's in a branch overhanging the general area, it's still in ground under repair.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's another good one to look at, because it talks about when the relief, the spot would be directly underneath the spot, or the spot in the tree, and on that ground would be that reference point for relief there. Okay, and then for temporary water, it's not enough for the ground to be merely wet, muddy, or soft, or for the water to be momentarily visible as the player steps on the ground. An accumulation of water must remain present either before or after the stance is taken. So I think that's a really important point. We're defining what temporary water is it needs to stay there. It can't just be momentarily pop up and then rise down or go back down. It needs to be visible either before or after we've taken our stance, and stay and remain visible. Dew and frost are not temporary water. Snow and natural ice, we talked about this before. is at the discretion of the player. Let's see. Yep. So Tom had a good comment here on temporary water. It's the stance, not the dance. So that's a good way to think about it in terms of when you're taking that. It's when you take your stance, not the pounding or the dance to get the water to come up. So that's a good way to think about it. So Tom, thanks for sharing that.
Kyle, question.
Mhm.
Under ground and repair, it says any part of the course the committee defines to be ground under repair, or the definitions. So I'm just thinking, like, temporary water, I mean, is water that you're seeing there before you step there. It's like a pool or what have you. But if you've got like low-lying areas that are muddy that you don't want players playing out of, could they deem that ground under repair, the committee?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So any of those areas could be marked or declared ground under repair. So we could run into wet areas like that. It could be newly sodded areas. There are lots of different things that the committee could define in that case for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. All right, so if we have interference from an abnormal course condition, we do get relief. So interference is defined as if the player's ball is touching it or is on the abnormal course condition. The abnormal course condition physically interferes with the player's area of intended stance or swing, or when the ball is on the putting green, only when it's on the putting green, an abnormal course condition on or off the putting green intervenes on the line of play. So typically you'll have that with either temporary water puddling on the green, or you might have it with ground under repair, areas of bad grass growth that the committee defines as ground under repair. And again, it's everywhere except in the putting green. It's just going to be the lie of the ball, the area of intended stance, or the area of intended swing is where we have interference. And then there is a model local rule where the committee can adopt a local rule denying relief from an abnormal course condition that only interferes with the area of stance. So that's typically that's very, very common on putting greens. So we will allow relief maybe for worn areas on putting greens, but only if it interferes with the lie of the ball or the player's area of intended swing, but not for their stance in that case. And that you could make that same kind of local rule knowledge when it comes to bunkers as well, when giving relief from when we give relief under these COVID scenarios as well.
Kyle,
Mhm.
one of the issues I think that's really important is that the person has to take complete relief from the abnormal ground condition. I think it was last year at the amateur, we had on hole number 5, prior to making it a par 3, we had individuals that were taking up to 150 yards to get out of the wet conditions on the ground. So, and they should probably be cautioned that, and that might be their closest point of relief, but once they commit to that by picking up their golf ball, they have to take relief. They can't go back and obviously put it back. So we ran into that on several instances.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. In that they do need to take full relief. They're not taking partial relief in this case. So if they're taking relief under this rule, they need to take complete relief. Yep. Okay, if the abnormal course condition is close enough to distract the player, but does not meet any of the requirements, there's no interference under this rule. So it can't be close enough. It needs to actually interfere with the swing stance or the lie of the ball.
Hey, Kyle,
Yeah.
this is Craig, and before you proceed, I want to just point out that in one of our recent quizzes, there was an interpretation for the definition of the nearest point of relief /3, which everyone should take some time and look at, because it does allow some exceptions for when a player is not required to take complete relief when they change the club they're going to use. You want to go through that, or you want to just?
Yeah. Where is it? Is it
page 352
interpretation?
in the big book?
Yeah.
It's under the definition, nearest point of complete relief /3.
Sure. So I think that's 330. What is it?
352.
352.
Kyle, this was on mixed test last week.
Mm-hmm. I haven't taken it yet, so now I know to be aware.
Well, you might be the only one to get it right now.
Okay, so what is it? Is it 4, Craig, or 3? Sorry.
So because we ask a player to determine their nearest point of complete relief by selecting the club they're going to be using on their next shot, and once they complete that relief and they're free of the abnormal course condition with that club, apparently they're entitled to change their club. And then if that condition interferes with their stance, at that point, they are not required to take relief using that different club.
Right. Yep. Yeah, that's why. So if I think a lot of you guys remember that Jordan Spieth ruling at the PGA a few years back, and I put the link in the very beginning of the chat if anyone wants to watch it later. But basically, one of the first things that the rules referee Brad Gregory does is that he asks Jordan, how he would play the ball if the cart path wasn't there, or in his case, the temporary water wasn't there. And he tells him, the direction of line that he'd play. And, you do need to know that because as Craig was pointing out, that after you take your relief, if you change, you don't have to use that club. You can change at that point based on where you're at.
But Kyle, then you're really not taking complete relief because you're now back into the obstruction, but it's a second situation which allows for that. And that was, I never knew that. As much golf as I play, I never knew this piece of this decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a separate condition at that point, because we're only taking relief from that initial condition with the initial direction and line and way that we were wanted to play that shot.
Right, but then I could go ahead and take relief again.
Mm-hmm.
If you read the description in the book, it says the first drop was such a good drop that it created a great lie to play that shot with a different club. Right, so now I switch from my wedge to my 3-wood, and I can hit my 3-wood, but I'm now standing back under the obstruction, but it's okay because I'm changing clubs.
Well, also, it's a new situation. After you complete the drop, it's in the relief area. You aren't required to take relief from a cart path. And it's a separate rules incident once the ball comes to rest in the relief area.
Yep.
Yep.
No, great. Thanks for bringing that up, guys. It was good to talk about. So relief anywhere except in the balls in the penalty area. Again, when both So in this case, only when the abnormal course condition is on the course, so not when it's out of bounds, and the ball is anywhere on the course except in a penalty area. Okay, if the ball's in the penalty area, we have penalty area relief options for that. And then the other exception is if there is no relief, if it's clearly unreasonable to play the ball. So even though we might be on the cart path, if our ball is, in the middle of 2 tree roots and there's no way that we could reasonably play that shot, we can't take advantage of the situation just because we're on the cart path. So the key question to ask, and what that referee did in Jordan Spieth's case, is how would you play the shot if that abnormal course condition is not there? So if the cart path wasn't there, how would you handle that situation where your ball's in tree roots? You would take an unplayable. So that's what you do. And then similarly, if the interference only exists because of a crazy stance or an unreasonable direction of play, in that case, you would not be able to take relief. So if you're going to flip around and hit the shot left-handed only to get relief from the cart path, there's no relief in that case. Again, it's how would you hit the shot if that cart path wasn't there? So when we're taking relief from an abnormal course condition, we're going to use the nearest point of complete relief. So we'll show a quick video on this. If I can find it here.
First step in taking free relief from conditions such as ground under repair, temporary water, and immovable obstructions is to find the nearest point of complete relief. This is the spot, either left of, right of, or behind, where your ball lies that is not closer to the hole, and where the condition you are taking relief from is no longer in your way. You determine this spot by simulating the stance, swing, and direction of play you would use to play your ball if the condition didn't exist. The nearest point can be different depending on whether you are right or left-handed, your height, or your choice of club, etc. It's important to remember the nearest point isn't always the nicest point. In this case, the player's nearest point of complete relief from this path is under the tree, not to the left of the path in the clear. So it's a good idea not to lift your ball before figuring this out, because sometimes the best option is to just play the ball as it lies.
So you can see there in that video that, when the player is putting that tee in the ground, after they're taking their nearest point of complete relief, that's their reference point. And again, you're using the club that you're most likely going to hit for that shot and taking your stance. And after you take your stance, when you put your club down where that club head is, that's that nearest, or that reference point for your nearest point of complete relief. And you get 1 club length from there. So a lot of times people will get confused, or players get confused. They think it's 1 club length. It's not 1 club length. It's the nearest point of relief plus 1 club length. So it's really important that I can't tell you how many times I've seen a player measure 1 club length from the edge of the cart path to drop. Like that's not correct. So if we see that, we need to stop it. And again, we're talking in this example here, we've got a couple scenarios here where our ball is either B1 or B2, and our reference point that we're using, we'll start with B1, is where our club, or where our ball would be, our club head would be when we take our stance with the club we're most likely to hit. And then from that point, we get 1 club length, no closer to the hole in which to drop in. And then for B2, we get in our stance relief because our stance is on the cart path. And we get our stance over here to the right. And then our P2, or our reference point for this case, P2, is where that club head would be, and then 1 club length. So it's really important to understand that. Because it's not, like I said, it's not just 1 club length from the edge of the cart path or whatever. It's from that nearest point of complete relief, or P2 or P1 in our examples here.
Kyle, it's probably a good idea if you're on a cart path too, to just for point of reference to mark the ball before you start this process, so that you have that as your point of reference in case there's any question.
Yeah, so it's you know, either mark it, or you know, honestly, probably the best option, what I would recommend is to just leave the ball there, because after you're finding your nearest point of complete relief, you might decide that you don't want to take it and you'd rather play off the cart path or out of the ground repair or whatever. So it's probably best just to leave it there until you know exactly where it's going to be, and then you can pick the ball up. That's what I would recommend.
Yeah, that's a good recommendation. Just like in your video there, where that where the guy was, his nearest point of relief was under the tree. So it's a good suggestion. Just leave the ball where it is.
Yeah. But if we know for sure we're going to take relief from it and we pick it up, it's not a bad idea to mark that spot, so we know, you know, for sure where that is, just so that we have it to look back at later if we need to. And then, as that video pointed out as well, whether the golfer's left or right-handed matters in this case, where that nearest point of relief is going to be, nearest point of complete relief is going to be different if the golfer's left-handed versus right-handed.
This is Chris. I have a comment. Can you hear me?
Yep.
If you mark a ball on a cart path, if a player marks the ball on a cart path and they're thinking about taking abnormal course condition relief, they're going to think that allows them to put the ball back on the cart path should they decide they didn't want to take the relief without taking a 1-stroke penalty. That's the concern I have with marking the ball in an abnormal course condition versus leaving the ball there.
Right. Yeah. If they mark it and they lift it, if they decide to put it back, you know, they can do that. But like you said, they're still going to get that 1-stroke penalty. Yep.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Kyle, is you shouldn't mark it if you're going to take relief, or you should just leave it there. Don't mark it in case you decide not to take relief, because if you do decide not to take relief, it's going to be a 1-stroke penalty if you mark the ball. It's best to leave it there. You don't necessarily get a penalty automatically if you mark it, but if you did lift it and you end up wanting to put it back on that spot, you're going to get a penalty. But if you mark it and you lift it and you end up taking relief from cart path relief, there's no penalty there in that case. Okay.
So there's no issue with marking it per se. It's just that it's probably best just to leave the ball there until you know for sure, you know, where you're going to go.
So from a referee standpoint, it's best to suggest to the player, let's leave the ball in its position until either you identify for the player what his options are, or you ask the player if he or she knows their options and go through it with them.
Yeah. There was a question about embedded ball relief procedure, and we'll talk about that shortly. So it is a little different than this. So the embedded ball it does not involve the nearest point of complete relief. So nearest point of complete relief, we're talking about abnormal course conditions. So our cart paths, our ground under repair, things of that nature. Okay, so again, it's when we're talking about that nearest point of complete relief, again, it's when you're taking your stance with the club you're most likely to hit, and then one club length from where that club head would be or where that ball would be is our nearest point of complete relief. We need to stay inside the general area. Okay, and then we can't be nearer the hole than the reference point. And there needs to be complete relief from all interference by the abnormal course condition. So the key thing there is that by that specific abnormal course condition, you might take relief and then have interference from a different abnormal course condition, a different pile of or puddle of temporary water. But you need to take complete relief from that abnormal course condition that you're taking relief from. All right, so if our ball is in a bunker and there's interference by an abnormal course condition, the player can take free relief or penalty relief. So free relief, it would be inside the bunker with our nearest point of relief and stay inside that bunker, nearest point of complete relief. If there is no such nearest point of complete relief in the bunker, the player may still take relief by using the point of maximum available relief in the bunker as the reference point. So if you have a temporary water inside a bunker and there's nowhere in that bunker where you can take complete relief, you can take your maximum available relief and use that point as your reference. And again, that could be in a position where your ball may be least interfered with that temporary water. But in that case, your stance could be in that temporary water, but you do have that option to take maximum available relief inside the bunker if you want to stay inside the bunker for free relief. If you want to go outside the bunker, you can do that for a penalty stroke, and you'd take back on a line relief. And the reference point for that is the point on the course chosen by the player that is on the reference line is farther from the hole. So I think there's a picture of that here, where we have where the spot of the ball is. We can go back with the line with the flag outside the penalty, or outside the bunker for a one-stroke penalty, and then we get one club length in either direction in which to drop there, no closer to the hole. Okay, so either free inside the bunker or a penalty outside the bunker. We do run into situations where we do have a lot of temporary water in bunkers. The committee can declare those bunkers as ground under repair if they want to give players relief from that, so they're not having to figure out their maximum available relief. If we get a lot of rain, we'll definitely be checking the bunkers to see if there's any ones that might be issues, or any bunkers where there wouldn't be a spot that's not near the hole for which a player to drop as well.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all right. Go ahead.
If there's temporary water in a bunker, and the person and the temporary water is such that the person could stay in the bunker because there is an area for them to stay in the bunker, and the person says, well, I don't want to play in the sand. I'm a terrible sand bunker player, so I'm going to take a one-stroke penalty and use back of the line relief area. Does that person have that option?
Yes, yeah, they can choose either of those options, either free relief or the one-stroke penalty in that case. So it'd be up to them.
Okay.
Kyle, would a herd of deer running through a bunker creating a lot of tracks, would that be an abnormal course condition?
No. I'd have to look and see on that one. I don't, I don't, I don't know for sure inside the bunker, but if it's by definition, but I know that that has changed. So let me look into that, or someone can look into that. I don't know the exact answer on that off the top of my head.
There wouldn't be relief unless there was a local rule in effect.
Right. I think our pre-COVID, our COVID rules might allow for that with the disturbed area in the bunker.
So normally, there would not be relief in that case.
Yeah, that would be considered the rub of the golf course, I guess. That's how we generally treat it. Same as we would treat footprints, rub of the course.
No, it's
Right.
called irregularity of surface, for which there's no relief.
Yep. All right, so on the putting green, if we have interference from an abnormal course condition, and we're going to get our spot, and we have our nearest point of relief. In this case, we're just going to place it on there. They're not going to be the one club length because we're not dropping, we're placing. So we're finding that point. Same way we would before with the club we're most likely to hit, taking our stance, and then we place it. This golfer here is left-handed, and placing it on that spot and putting. And then in this case here, our relief can be either on the putting green or in the general area. So that's an important distinction here, that we can, in some cases, we might have to go off the putting green on the fringe if we want to take our relief. And we have the same relief procedure on the green. Again, if our ball was back here behind the water and on the green, we could get relief from that. We go to the point maybe over here that's not near the hole where we don't have interference with this, and we could play to the hole, or it could be over here. I don't know the exact spot, but we would get away from this and then place the ball there and then putt.
Kyle, earlier there was a question about a tree rooted and ground under repair. If the ball lay in the branch, the player gets relief. If the ball lies in tree roots that are outside the ground under repair, there is no relief.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that.
That's correct.
So just like we talked about before, if we have an area or this abnormal course condition and the ball is not found, but we're virtually certain that it's in there, the player can take relief using the relief procedures. However, again, we have to have that knowledge of virtual certainty. Okay, and then we're going to use the estimated point in this case here. If we know it's in there, but we couldn't find it, we're going to use the estimated point where the ball last crossed the edge of the abnormal course condition on the course as a spot of the ball for relief purposes. So if we know that our ball is in this area, but we can't find it, maybe it's 2 feet deep of water. We know it's in there. We saw the splash, but we can't find it. And we're going to say that the ball is at the point where it last crossed this area. So maybe right here. And then that's the point we would assume the ball is at to take our nearest point of complete relief. So then we'd have our stance and then with our club. And so maybe then the nearest point is going to be here, and then we get our 1 club length to drop in there. Okay, but again, we need to know for certain that it's in there. And if we don't have knowledge of virtual certainty, then we need to go back and play where we last played from. All right, if we have a no play zone, a no play zone, we'll also one of the options for no play zone is to define it as an abnormal course condition. So we'll do this for, like we said, flower beds. There are other areas, maintenance areas that the course is working on. We'll define these as no play zones, and when we're taking, in those situations, the player must take relief from those areas to avoid penalty. And again, it's the same kind of concept here, in that we're going to find our nearest point of complete relief from that spot, not near the hole, and then take our one club length from there. Some cases we may use drop zones to help with this, especially if the areas are large. We could use a drop zone as an additional relief area for no play zones that are defined as abnormal course conditions. And again, keep in mind too that the no play zone, you could have a scenario where the ball is not in there, but the stance is, and the player is going to take relief for that situation as well. All right. Any questions on that before we move on? Yep. Okay. So dangerous animal conditions. Some examples of dangerous animal conditions: poisonous snakes, stinging bees, alligators, fire ants, or bears. If there's a bear on the golf course, you can DQ me, whatever you need to do. I'm not going to be anywhere near that golf course, but keep in mind that it is a dangerous, or when we're talking about animals, we're not talking about humans. So if I walk around, I'm not a dangerous animal, even though some people might say that. Just kidding, but try to keep it light. But again, animal is not human. It's in the definition there. So we can take relief, except when playing the ball as it lies is clearly unreasonable because of something other than the dangerous animal condition. Okay, so again, if it's stuck in between two roots or deep inside a bush, even though there might be a fire ant hill there, we're not going to get relief from that just because we're standing on a fire ant hill. And if we only take if we take a crazy stance to get interference from this, or a direction of play, that would not qualify as well. So if the ball is anywhere except the penalty area, we're going to take relief, finding our nearest point of complete relief. Nearest point that's in this case though, we're going to find the spot that's where it's not quote unquote dangerous anymore. That's kind of our starting point, and then we get our stance and everything from there. So that's a little bit subjective in terms of defining what's not dangerous, especially when you're talking about maybe a dangerous object that's moving, like an alligator or something like that. But that's kind of the starting point where we determine our nearest point of complete relief.
Kyle, you're not saying the previous slide. If you're standing on a fire ant hill, you'd get relief from that, wouldn't you?
Yeah. So it's just like we would for any other abnormal course condition. If it's in our stance, if it's in our swing or our live ball, we would be able to get relief from a dangerous animal condition.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. That's what I thought. I misinterpreted it.
Yep, but the example I use was that if my ball's in the middle of a bush and there's no way that I could hit it, I wouldn't just get relief only because I'm standing on the fire ant hill. Because if that fire ant hill was there, I couldn't play the ball from the bush. But if my ball is just standing in the fairway and I'm standing on a fire ant hill, I would be able to get relief from that.
Yes, yes, you just can't take advantage of the situation because it's there.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So if the ball is in a penalty area, though, we have a couple of options. So we can take free relief inside the penalty area, or we can take penalty relief outside the penalty area. Okay, so it's a little bit different in that we have an option there. But if it's inside the penalty area, you can get relief from it, but you have to stay inside the penalty area in order to not get a penalty. So I had a scenario when I was working down in South Carolina where the player's ball was inside the penalty area. So we had the penalty area here, the golf course was here, and the ball was sitting right here on grass. But then here was, mama alligator staring at the person ready to hit. And so, what I should have done was tell the player that they can either take free relief inside the penalty area. I don't know if they would think that would be safe, but their other option in that case would just be to take their penalty area relief. And so instead, I messed up. I gave her free relief outside of the penalty area, away from the alligator. So she got a 1-stroke favor from me for my ignorance. But in this case here, because I ended up giving her relief outside here, it should have been a 1-stroke penalty for taking penalty area relief.
Well, you're just a big teddy bear. Of course, that would be then a problem.
I just didn't know any better. So,
Could you
but
sleep at night?
if you want to say it that way, sure. All right. Embedded ball. So the best way to look at this without taking up too much time here is just to really look at this picture here. So if the ball needs to be embedded for us to take relief from it. So again, part of the ball, it needs to be embedded in its own pitch mark. That's the key thing, in its own pitch mark. And it needs to be below the level of the ground. So you'll see a couple examples here where the dirt or the grass is broken. And you have that top example where that's embedded. And second one, even though it's not touching the dirt, the level of the ground has been broken and it's embedded. Then you have your last scenario, the Patrick Reed scenario. I'm just kidding. The spot where the ball is in deep grass, and it has not broken the ground. So in that case, it's not embedded. So when we're taking our relief for embedded ball, we're finding that point right behind where the ball was, and we get 1 club length in either direction, not near the hole in which to drop. So previously we tried to drop right on that exact spot or close as possible to it. Now we get the 1 club length area in which to drop. But again, our spot is right behind it. And so because our relief area is completely behind where that embedded pitch mark was, there's no scenario where the ball can end up and roll back in that same pitch mark that it was in before, where the player would have to play it. They'd always be able to redrop or drop again in that scenario. So they don't need to worry about that. But as we talked about this before, it's always a good idea to wait to fix that pitch mark until after you drop and it's not going to be impacting your next shot. All right. Any questions about embedded ball?
Kyle, the picture shows 2 club lengths, one in each direction. Did they get the full 180 degrees?
Yeah, yep. So it's just basically that one, it's a swivel from this middle point, and they get they get anywhere in that 180 degree there. So, yep. Yeah, so even though it technically looks like 2 club lengths, it's really only 1 club length just on a swivel.
Kyle, what happens if it's embedded in the upward side of the small water runoff type of thing, where it was raining but it's dry there now? Does he get? Would they get relief to the rearward side of that little ditch or whatever it is called?
What was the first? Sorry, I missed the first part.
The ball, visualize a ditch and the ball's embedded in upward side of it. Would they get relief all the way back on the other side of the ditch to it? The ditch is not marked as a penalty area.
Yeah, so that's the key thing there, is that if we're talking about a penalty area, we don't get relief from an embedded ball rule, which you know. But yeah, in that case there, if you had your ditch and it was embedded here,
Mm-hmm.
you know, your 1 club length could take you beyond outside the ditch if you wanted to.
Oh, towards the hole?
Well, sorry, not towards the hole, but not near the hole. So if my
okay,
maybe I'm not doing the best, but basically, you know, you could get yourself out of the ditch if the play of the hole was this way, because your 1 club length wouldn't be closer to the hole.
Okay.
You're suggesting that a ditch that carries water and is not marked as a penalty area is not a penalty area by definition?
No, we're not suggesting that. The thing was just that there was a ditch that wasn't marked as a penalty area.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be marked.
It doesn't have to be marked, so wouldn't it?
Right.
So you don't get embedded ball relief from a penalty area. Isn't that ditch a penalty area whether it's marked or not?
No, that changed in 2019. So it used to be, but now there's option to not mark it as a penalty area for ditches that don't contain water.
Kyle, where is that? Because I'm looking at the definition of penalty area.
Yeah.
And it says any body of water, including a sea, lake, pond, river, ditch, surface drainage ditch, or other open water course, even if not containing water. That's a definition of penalty area.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
I know it's in there. I'll have to find it. It might be in the conditions or something, but there is an option to not mark those areas.
Okay, it's in the last paragraph. Okay, if an open water course usually does not contain water, yada, 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 the committee may define that area as part of the general area.
Right.
Yep. But it have to be defined in some kind of local rule.
Right, it would have, right.
It have to be a local rule.
I don't know if you need to define it as a local rule. I think you just, the other way to do it would be that you would say that all penalty areas in the course are marked with red paint. And if it's not marked with red paint, it's not a penalty area. There are the exceptions that if the committee messes up something, then that could still be a penalty area. But I think that would be another way to define it without putting a local rule in place.
Well, if that's not a local rule, what is it?
Just a low
maybe it's a local rule. It's a local rule saying what's a penalty area and what isn't, I guess. Yeah. I mean, but you don't need to, I guess what I'm saying is that you don't need to say that those areas are not penalty areas. You can say that what areas are penalty areas to define what are penalty areas.
Yeah, there's lots of low areas like this on golf courses, and they're not marked, and they're just part of the golf course. I mean, usually if they're a penalty area, can be any area that the committee determines if they mark, and they usually mark them.
That's right, but the definition says that these types of areas are penalty areas unless the committee says otherwise.
Okay, I visualize this thing as a mowed area, by the way. I forgot to put that in, so.
That's the way I'm looking at it. Usually it's an area, a low area. It's part of the golf course. It's being mowed.
Yeah, but it provides a water runoff, let's say, so it doesn't accumulate in the middle of the course.
Yeah, I think,
Visualize.
I think, yeah, I think it brings up a good point in terms of like, you know, the way that we write the rules is for, you know, not only for tournament play, but for everyday play as well. And so if the golf course doesn't have a local rule or anything that defines it, then that guidance that's in the book allows those areas to be defined as penalty areas. But if we're running an event, you know, we will decide what's a penalty area and what's not. So, you know, if you were just two guys or 4 people going out to play and that situation came up, you know, you would, you know, if it wasn't technically clearly marked, then yeah, I guess technically it'd be a penalty area, but chances are the 4 people are just going to decide what to do and go on. And, you know, so I think the way the rules are written is there is option for the committee and a lot of flexibility with the committee to do certain things for these scenarios. All right. I think that's it. There was one other point here, just lifting to see whether it's removed or not, but I won't want to keep anyone any later. So I'll stick around if anyone has any additional questions or we want to talk about ditches and what those are. Be happy to discuss in more depth, but appreciate everyone taking their time to join us to learn something. And next week we'll be covering rules 17, 18, and 19.
Okay,
Thank
thanks.
you, Kyle. Thanks, Kyle.
Good
thanks.
job.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle.
Thank you. Good job.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Usually good job.
Kyle, I got a
Yes,
question.
sir.
Yeah, go ahead with the question.
I'd ask it on